All right. Hello, everyone. It is Friday lunchtime and getting ready for our live show here today. Just doing a quick check of stuff and getting things ready. Our guest is in the green room, so we are ready to go. Got my notes here, got my water. We are set. So let's go ahead and get this thing started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Podnuts Pro. I am your host, Marvin B. Ladies and gentlemen, hope you're having a great day. I am having a great day. The rain has stopped here in Fort Lauderdale. It is a nice sunny day, as you can see the sun peering through my blinds here. So I'm hoping things are going to be great the rest of the day and into the weekend. For those of you that are just joining us, either by video or by audio, Podnuts Pro is a tech show for business techs, IT professionals, managed service providers, anyone that is providing support to businesses. And hopefully we can help you make your business better, stronger, and faster. And a way that we're going to do that is today, we've got a guest in the house, Billy Alston, CEO and co-founder of RocketCyber. Billy, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Marvin. Thanks for having me on the show today. It's always great to be live on the Podnuts Pro.
All right. So let's do. Well, actually, let me ask you this first, because I know that you're in Dallas, Texas, and I don't think the storms recently have affected you, but I know that Sally had gone through east of you a while back, and Beta was over there trying to wreak havoc. So, any fallout from those storms?
You know, Dallas evaded most of those weather hurricanes, those unfortunate things that hit up the Gulf. I would say Houston, kind of all the way to New Orleans, probably got well more impacted than what Dallas did. So we're safe.
Okay. All right. And what else is happening? I guess, are you a Cowboys fan?
Well, gosh, I got to make my personal stance now. I'm actually a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, but being in Dallas,
really,
yeah, you got to be very quiet about stating that. So,
oh my, yeah, that's some deep roots there, because how do I explain this? So I'm not from Dallas, but when I was growing up, my dad was in the Air Force, and we were in Berlin, Germany, I think I was between 6 and 10. When I came back to the States, of course, Dallas was America's team.
Yeah.
Well, I started watching football, and Dallas was my favorite. And boy, did I hate watching Dallas lose to Pittsburgh in those Super Bowls.
Yeah, I'm a diehard 1970s Steeler fan, and supported, I don't know if you know, but a lot of those Steelers back from the 70s are actually from Texas.
Really?
And yeah, even if you take Mean Joe Green, he used to play football literally right around the corner, University of North Texas. You got Terry Bradshaw from Louisiana, Rocky Bleier, Mel Blount, all those guys. So, yeah. So
very interesting. Yep, I know those names, just like I know Roger and Too Tall and all of those, even through the dreaded years of Leon Lett. So
good old days.
All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. You know what? I should probably do this. I normally don't do a ton of announcements, but I do need to say this. So this show is broadcast live on Friday, September 25th. I have mentioned out to the Podnuts Pro community, the listeners that we have here, that we are approaching show number 300, and we are going to have a live podcast party this upcoming Wednesday night, September 30th, and it's going to be starting at 8 p.m. I think you're going to be quite surprised at the people that I pull into this show. So if you have not been able to go back and hear shows before I was the host, this is going to be a good time to do that. We went back and found shows going back to the very first Podnuts Pro episodes. So if you can join us on Wednesday, September 30th, join us live. There may be an adult beverage or two, so it'll be a good show. So that'll be good. So just wanted to get that out, because if I forget, somebody will call me out. So, all right. So Billy, RocketCyber, let's talk about that. First of all, I need to tell you that in my pre-show prep, when I let some of the listeners and my MSP peers know who my guests are for an upcoming show, usually don't get much response. This one, I got a lot of response. I was quite surprised.
That's good to hear.
So got a whole list of questions that they want me to ask you and all of that good stuff. So just wanted to let you know. So let's, of course, get the standard stuff out of the way. Tell us about yourself and your history in RocketCyber.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Texas, and my partner grew up in that Houston, Louisiana area. We've been together for 20 some odd years. Through several different startups, primarily always in the security space, now known as the cyberspace, I guess. And so we've been developing technologies, ranging from intrusion detection products to vulnerability scanners to auditing products, AV related products. And the last company that we actually started was acquired by a company called Logic Now, and literally like a month later, we were acquired by SolarWinds. And that's where we got acclimated a lot with the entire MSP industry. Because historically, we were always selling and developing solutions for the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, and even the large enterprise. And when we analyzed just the North American market, we had to find a starting place, and we said, wow, the U.S. Small Business Association says there's 31 million small businesses just in North America. And they define the small business as being 500 employees or smaller. We were like, wow, these are the guys making the headlines, getting popped by breaches, intrusions, ransomware, all this stuff. And we were like, aha, there's the light bulbs going on. And we're like, we see a huge problem here. How can we address it? Obviously, we could go and develop some solution, but how do you go after 31 million North American small business? And so at that time, it kind of dawned upon us. We were like, well, why don't we develop a solution that's purposely built for the managed service provider and use that as a vehicle to actually get the security solution downstream to the small business owner. And so developing the technological components was one thing, but it had to be very affordable where it's going to be adopted and consumed by the small business owner. So those are kind of tricky parts, right? Because you have those big vendors, people like McAfee, Symantec, have always tried to make their way into this market, but they either technologically or architecture-wise or pricing, there's always been a limitation on why the big boys have never had success in this MSP community. You've got to integrate with the MSP business operations, your RMM tools, your PSA. So there's just a lot of fundamental plumbing that we said, okay, we could start checking the box there. We can do that. We can do that. And make a long story short, we took our history of developing all these different security products, put them all together, and put it in an ecosystem, added multi-tenancy on it, and integrated with the way MSPs do business, from billing to ticketing to deployment. And then we're working on all kinds of other bells and whistles right now to just make it, where it's just everything streamlined. But that's how RocketCyber, evolved. We've been at it a little over 3.5 years now. And when you think of us, we're classified in this specific category called SOC as a service. In the enterprise world, they call that Managed SOC or Managed Security Operations Center. And when you think about it, it really makes sense, because when we originally started this business, what did a small business typically have in their stack? They had a firewall and they had an antivirus. Now today, given today's things have improved, there's a few additional technologies that continue with that layered approach, if you will. And we've just been continuously integrating with that stack. to make sure we leverage our security backgrounds, our operations center, to be able to apply not just the technology, but the human element on continuous monitoring 24 hours around the clock. So I'll stop right there.
Okay. So, so I have a couple of these questions in my mind because I actually was going to search out your company. We were supposed to have a bunch of ASCII conferences, as they do every year, and I pick a handful of vendors that I want to reach out to when those are. So you were a company that I was going to reach out to, and it's another reason having you on the show helps.
Yeah.
But in terms of reaching out, now your company is focused primarily on MSPs. So people like me who are providing these services to our companies. But in terms of these monitoring and these alerts and everything, it always seems as though we have troubles. And when I say we, I'll say me, as well as other people, in terms of outsourcing some of these things. But I know that they need to be stuff like log monitoring and the 365 alerts and all of that stuff. So it seems like you came in with a perfect niche to help us do those things. Yeah.
So, and I'll just respond to that real quick. So I go back in time when we were originally investigating the RocketCyber conception of launching the business. And when I was doing due diligence and analysis on the market, we heavily saw what I call legacy AV products that are non-next gen AV. We saw some edge protection that had a firewall. And then I would say during our livelihood at RocketCyber, the market shifted. Now they're implementing 2FA. You're seeing mail security. You're seeing, all different types of VPN technologies. There's just lots and lots of layers being adopted in the stack, and which is great. That means that the small business owner is now being educated that just that firewall and AV is not enough. So they're actually listening to their trusted advisor is the perception that we have. That trusted advisor being you as the MSP owner, that is really the key element for communicating what that stack needs to look like. And the problem with that, though, is your MSP business, in many cases, a lot of these providers, they may only have 2 or 3 employees, and the more layers of security you put in the stack, it's like who's going to monitor and actually put eyes on the results or the telemetry that all of this threat data, this log data that's coming from all of these different products. We know there's bad stuff in there. So how do you timely respond and investigate, which is what we call the process of triage. And that is the ability for a security analyst to be able to weed through all these events and surface up to the top what is an incident. And that is, my friend, is what we would move into the business process of communicating to the PSA. Not all of that log data, because it's very overwhelming for an MSP operation.
Right. Well, and that was one of the reasons that I figured it's time for me to dig deep into all of this stuff, because just like everybody else, I've got the firewall, I've got the AV, I've got the centralized web protection, I've got all that. But setting up the proper alerts, and that's probably the key phrase, proper alerts, because one of the things I think we always fall into a habit of is if it gets too noisy, we just start turning stuff off.
Yeah, you ignore it.
Right. So my question is, and I'll use SonicWall as an example because that's my primary appliance that I use, but how deep do you guys get into, or how do you get into monitoring those types of logs? Because that's really probably, at least for me, the first place to start is being able to analyze the logs. Get alerted when there are breaches, monitor connections, especially in this remote world with the VPNs and stuff, knowing when people log in and stuff. But how deep do you guys get into that?
Yeah, so I want to back up, just kind of set the very top layer in. So when you let's look at how an attacker gets in. They're either going to get in at the endpoint from the cloud layer, being cloud-based email, cloud-based applications, or they're going to get in via the network. And that's what I call 3 primary attack vectors that we've established ourselves for providing continuous monitoring. Now, what are future attack vectors that you might want to address? Things like IoT, if you want to secure and monitor your microwaves and smart refrigerators. I just purposely, I accept that risk and let them attack my meat and spoiled milk at the moment. So, and then as far as the mobility, the iPhones are so locked down that it's not really worth the effort. Android's another picture. But it's, you have to find a starting point. And so endpoint, network, and cloud is really where we started. Is where we've evolved to at this given moment. To answer your question on the network side of things, so I'll take SonicWall for an example. We take that full log stream, which, as you may understand, firewalls generate lots and lots of logs.
Yes, they do.
And most of these firewall vendors have 7 different severities. They all pretty much follow the same format, all the way down at the very bottom of meaningless. Most of the data is meaningless at the bottom of the stack or bottom of the severities called debug and error and informational type alerts. Some of those types of things we surface up, but for the most part, we're looking for critical, emergency, and other type severities. So we have to weed through all of that data, both from a human perspective, which is called the SOC analyst. And a lot of times we hear about in the industry, we use this phrase of a SOC analyst really gets burned out because all they're doing is, looking at log data all day long and surfacing and escalating these events up. And it takes a very special person to work in that job role and to not burn them out, but also to continuously enhance their education so they understand not just today and historical attacks, but also to be able to absorb new hacker techniques and tactics on how they're getting in today and tomorrow. So it's a very challenging, but it's also a very rewarding role. Yeah.
All right. So one of the questions that I got, and actually I should have had it myself, is one of the biggest problem is storing the logs. And it's always something where, trying to find a syslog server or something like that. So when you're going in and grabbing that stuff, do you have a storage vault where the logs are stored and not just, analyzed and alerted?
That's correct. So I would say that's an educational point that the entire MSP community needs to get better educated on. And there's two situations why log storage is important. I've seen many organizations, they take in the logs and they delete it after 7 days, which I think is the default for most firewall logging. Unfortunately, so many small business customers that we monitor from an MSP perspective have to adhere to regulatory mandates. Things like PCI, HIPAA, and the list goes on and on and on. And each and every one of these regs or regulations, they all have different durations that you're supposed to retain and store that log data. Some of them are 6 months, some of them are a year, some of them all the way out to 7 years. So what we decided to do with our subscription, which is a monthly subscription, is we include a 1-year log retention just to adhere to those compliance situations, if you will. But that's the compliance component on why it's necessary. The other reason, and there's actually, we could host a podcast specifically on this topic, but another very compelling reason to store logs is, let's say an incident does occur. You want to be able to have an evidence trail going back in time so you can be able to present on a silver platter when investigators come knocking on the front door. And when it comes to forensic investigation, you also want to go back and take a look at any statistical anomalies, whether you're researching the same perpetrator coming from the same device or same geolocations, so you can be able to run those queries and do that forensic analysis, if you will. But that's kind of staying at a high level on 3 key reasons why you would want to maintain that log.
Well, the the problem is I know we have to maintain it. It's getting that across to the customer that not only does it have to be maintained, but it's got to be stored somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's always the big thing as well. Do we put another server device or somewhere to store the logs, or do we pay for an offsite service? So those are the questions we have to answer.
Yeah, it's very so. Just where we're at today, in fact, here in about a week and a half, what we're doing is we're creating different states of the data. So at the given moment, let's say you've been on with us for 6 months, and all that 6 months data is sitting in a repository that our analysts are constantly reviewing that data. But here in about a week and a half, we're moving to positioning where we can actually classify and state the data that says yesterday we acknowledged, reviewed all of those log data, and we didn't find anything malicious and or suspicious. That will move to an acknowledged and archived state. So it's basically sitting there in a repository. But if for whatever reason, let's say an incident comes up tomorrow and we need access, you can actually pull that data back and allow the security analyst to be able to look at data today and also correlate any statistical anomalies that transpired historically.
Okay, so that brings a question to mind. If I were to be, set up in a situation where I get an alert and I need to go back and look at the logs, what do I see as the MSP in terms of logs? Do I see, a current state, yesterday, last week, sort of a thing? Or is that something that I basically have to forward to RocketCyber and have them present that information to me?
Yeah, so there's a couple things I want to add clarity here is most MSPs, and when I say most, I say there's many MSPs that don't have the intellect or desire to go through and actually review binary format syslog type data.
Yeah, desire is correct.
Yeah, so, and maybe even if they do have the intellect, they really don't want to do that. So you want to push that responsibility off to your SOC provider. In this case, it would be the RocketCyber SOC analyst that says, hey, that's our responsibility to go off and look at that data from yesterday and correlate it to today, and just finding any similar patterns. However, if Marvin, as the MSP owner, for whatever reason, needs to pull all of that data and be able to align it with the classification or the state of the data, whether it's, yes, we've investigated this data set, whether it's been acknowledged and archived or whatever state it may be, you'll always have the capability to pull that and have all the different data components sectioned out by whatever state they're in.
Okay. And I'm assuming that there's some sort of report that we can just simply prepare and I'm assuming send to the customer and say, here's the monthly report, for August, nothing malicious happened, or, 2 things happened. We investigated them. They were minor, that sort of thing. So there's those types of reports that we can pull, right?
Yeah, you have your monthly and your quarterly type reports. The small business owner is only going to really care about an executive report. They're not going to want to see all of that log data and failed logins and all the Russian attempts of trying to break into the network, which in some cases, you may want to show them things like that, but that's really, for different purposes.
Right. So a question that came up that somebody asked me and I was trying to figure out how to phrase it properly without being offensive, but somebody pretty much had said, that, how do you guys defend against false alerts? Because I guess some people have had, and I can't say it was RocketCyber, but I know that in the past, one of the problems with these types of services is that techs like me who don't want to be bombarded with alerts, get alerts and, but I don't know.
I'll take a stab at that. I've dealt with false positives my whole life on whether it's our own products or whether they're other products, and especially we're doing it with other products today. So when RocketCyber originally launched in the market, which was last year, that was a software-only solution where you would be responsible for looking at all this data and trying to decipher it, which is a great offering. But what we found is the entire MSP community just didn't have layers of security guys sitting around to go through and look at all this data. So therefore, when we recognized that you guys as a community didn't have all these dedicated security staff just sitting here going through alerts all day long, we were like, we've got to turn the ship. And we've actually got to create our own SOC, go and staff all of the security guys and still provide this at a very reasonable cost, because that responsibility has to be on us. So when we transition from a product to a SOC as a service, it is very rare that you're going to get any type of false positive. And the reason is because you've got a human certified cyber SOC analyst that's going through each and every one of these events. And it's actually a human that escalates the threat event into what we call an incident ticket. Now, let's say for an example, you have one of your customers that we're managing, right? And somebody logs in from Colombia, the country Colombia, and it's the first time we've ever seen this. And if we see somebody log in from Colombia from some destination, and it might be a small business in Tulsa, Oklahoma, well, we're going to file an incident ticket on that. However, what you may have realized is the president just went to Bogota, Colombia on vacation. So therefore, you have those opportunities, and what we can do is do a temporary exception to that president that's out on travel.
Right.
But those would be really the only type of false positive that you would ever get from our SOC. I can't speak for other SOCs.
Okay, that's fine. I didn't go back and ask the person to clarify. Yeah. So it was like a list of questions, and I'm like, all right, I'll try to ask.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, that's going to be the value proposition of almost every SOC as a service. Most SOC companies shouldn't be sending you false alerts. If they are, I'd be looking for another provider, because the real value, when you think of a SOC as a service, we're really security guys that work for you. And I mean, without you having to go, hire 3 or 4 or 5 guys and supply them around the clock and train them and pay all their benefits and all that kind of stuff. And that's a good perception or analogy to think about it.
All right. So one of the things that piqued my interest in you earlier this year, I believe, January or February, you introduced 365 monitoring, or a suite of 365 products. So I wanted to ask you about those. And I know that there's 3 at least separate that I know of, and they each kind of do their own things. But can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'd say probably the first 3 years of RocketCyber, we really focused on endpoint telemetry, gathering threats that are really present and agnostic on the endpoint. And we were like, well, we know attackers are getting into these endpoints, but it only gave us half the question. It's like, okay, well, great. How did this actually get there? And when we started doing all this analysis and incident investigation, half the time it was coming from email. Right. That either A, was some user clicked on a link, or they opened up a malicious PDF, or whatever the attack happened to be. We were like, we have to expand our attack vector monitoring capabilities. We were like, what's in common with the entire North American small business community? The majority of them are heavily populated with Microsoft Office 365. In fact, it's almost a monopoly when you think about it.
It's getting there.
Yeah, I mean, poor little Google. It's I hate to say that, but and we were like, this is a huge problem. And I'm like, literally, if I'm just a dedicated security guy working for Marvin, and I don't know how many customers you have, but let's say you have 30 to 40 customers, like many MSPs that are on the smaller mid-size scale. And if you think about all those users, the average MSP's got 1,500 to 2,000 Microsoft users, and you have to be monitoring that login activity. And if you go out there and you poll 10 MSPs that are not using a SOC today, how many of them are actually monitoring their users for compromised email?
Well, I'm sure not enough, because I was one of those people, and I started doing it late last year. Mm-hmm. But but I found it tedious to go into each tenant, set up the alerts. Do I really want this alert for this user? Do I want this for the whole for the whole group? Do I want this for this client and not another client? So that was one reason I looked into this, because I saw that. I'm like, ooh, that may help me.
That alone, in fact, we actually, when you sign up for the RocketCyber SOC service, we actually give you all your Microsoft Office user monitoring for free. We don't even charge you for it. Oh. We were originally going to charge, and we were like, you know what? There's no way that it's going to be very hard for the SMB owner to continue swallowing additional dollars for the Microsoft user. And we were like, let's go ahead and embed that into our SOC service as one of those compelling attack vectors that they have to address. In fact, we probably, as of a month ago, I haven't done the analysis in September, we average uncovering probably 5 to 6 email compromises a day on these small business networks. So, it's people are logging in, people are already inside those Office accounts, and they just don't know about it because you don't actually have the capability. The biggest pain point is exactly what you said. Who is going to take the time to go through 40 to 50 tenants and individually log in to go download and export that CSV report and figure out who has successfully logged into an unauthorized location?
Right.
Not
which IP address, who was it, and are they authorized? Are they a global admin, which was a big problem.
So that's one of so to answer your question, that's what we call our Office Login Analyzer.
Okay.
You literally authenticate, you leverage our multi-tenancy, and it's going to give you insight into the thousands of users that are under your fleet of customers. And we're going to provide you immediate gratification when we identify any type of successful unauthorized connection. But what's equally important is you want to be able to monitor the brute force activity. So just because I see a guy from Russia try to get into Marvin's emails, one thing. If I see the guy from Russia that's coming from that same region, that's literally trying to get in 3 or 4 times a day, there's actions that we can perform to be able to eliminate him. Sure, it could be a cat and mouse game. We could be able to block his IPs or his subnets. But as we all know, the attackers are going to go change IPs or networks, what have you. So it's a very compelling reason to either A, implement things like 2FA, which we know has its own challenges from an SMB owner adopting that type of solution. They view it as an extra step.
Yes.
And as a distraction in their business. So what else could we do? We could go and enable what's called conditional access. And that will go a long way to thwarting off these guys that continuously are compromising Office emails. And a lot of people aren't really educated on what conditional access is. But those are 2 components as it relates to our, what I call login activity. The second thing I wanted to talk about is what's called our full-blown Office 365 log monitor, which really in essence is an Azure Active Directory and all of its respective apps. So you're going to be logging everything related to like users, groups, escalated privileges. Do I now have a user that just joined a privileged group that now has admin access? That's one component. Another analogy that's actually a higher priority than that, what about all the unauthorized mail forwarding rules that we see get created every day?
Right.
You can go and put in whatever policy you want. I'm just telling you, every organization somehow finds a way to get unauthorized mail forwarding rules that's going to joebob@hacksaw.com, and nobody knows that mail forwarding rule is there.
Yep. There's always one. Always one.
So we provide insight and we provide immediate gratification that says, hey, Marvin, we just identified some disgruntled employee at one of your customers. Maybe they actually instigated it and did it on intention because they know they're on the way out. That's one.
Yep,
or 2, maybe it's the bad guy who broke into your email, and we see this all the time. When they actually get into the email account, they're going to do 2 things. They're either going to perform what's called internal spear phishing, now that Marvin trusts me, I'm going to send you an email as that user. You're going to be more likely to open up the PDF, and it's going to give me access to your endpoint, allow me to establish persistence, and you know the rest.
Yep.
That's one. The second thing, the more silent and deadly, is the unauthorized mail forwarding rule, where basically these attackers, they get into your account, and that's the only thing they do. They just sit there and get copies of all your email. Eventually, it's almost like it's coin operated. So,
or they get in,
yeah,
forward the mail, delete the copy, and then start responding as you.
Yeah, exactly. So those are just a couple of those right there alone. I mean, you could almost literally just start a mini SOC business that just does that alone, just because of the market need. And it's probably the biggest blind spot in security throughout North American small business today. It's just huge. That opportunity is huge.
Yeah, I had 2 incidents over the last year, and that was why I said I've got to look into this, because again, me going into each tenant and setting those up and watching them is just, I mean, it's necessary.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, for a company as small as mine, it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, it is a pain. And when we hang up, I'd like to invite you this weekend to register for an account, go sign up all your customers. You're going to get 21 days of free monitoring anyway. Let's identify, are any of those users actually compromised?
All right. I like that. And I like the fact that you're including 365 free anyway, as whatever the subscription is. We don't have to talk prices now.
Sure.
But I mean, that should be a no-brainer just to add that alone. Even if we turn around and, mark it up at Buck or Mailbox or something. So
sure.
It'll be good. And I can do this. Let me do this because I want to acknowledge, and I don't know if she's still on or not, but you just got a huge endorsement from a listener and a guest on the show, Don Sizer, Third Element Computer. RocketCyber is awesome for management. So I wanted to get that out there. And
thank you, Don.
Don in the group for us. So there was another component that, so the log analyzer, the log monitoring, but the secure score, I wanted to ask you about that specifically, because that to me seems like it's, I don't want to say fluff if I present it to a client, but what exactly is that and how much of a benefit can it be for us?
Yeah, so the secure score is probably underutilized in the MSP space, to be transparent and honest with you.
Okay.
However, it is very, very crucial. So for these people that are adopting NIST compliance, CIS benchmarks, regulations, and you want to start implementing controls and providing better security hygiene to your customer, the Microsoft Secure Score is actually awesome. And what we do is we provide that integration that gives you your total Microsoft security score by each and every customer. The unique thing that's underneath the hood of that secure score are the lack of controls, security configurations that could be enabled or turned on in order to improve the security hygiene for a given customer. And I'm just going to go pick on MFA for an example. Microsoft says if you enable MFA for a small business customer, you're going to improve their score by 50 points on the Microsoft Secure Score. However, we know that if the small business customer rebuttals MFA, which quite often that they do that, right? There's an alternative scoring method that says, hey, the customer has neglected this. Let's go implement conditional access that will still get you a bucket of points. And it's in order to make that security hygiene go up and make it harder for the attacker to actually get in the account. But let's go back to MFA for an example. So let's say the customer has enabled MFA. What we're also going to do is we're going to give you all the users and tell you where 2FA MFA has been enabled, and those users that have either A, evaded it, or B, disabled it somehow in case they had those privileges. So that way you get visibility across your fleet of 2,000 users you're monitoring to figure out which ones have either evaded that security configuration or two, just never turned it on in the first place, even though the corporation adopted it. So that's a little bit about the secure score.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, there's right now we have 2 additional Microsoft apps in development. As you may or may not have heard, so they've got their own email security component right now called Microsoft ATP 365.
Right.
That would be a competitor to a lot of those mail spam protections that we're all aware of, Proofpoint, Mimecast, all that kind of good stuff. So we are developing a 365 ATP, so that way you can get all of that spam phishing telemetry inside of your RocketCyber SOC to be able to give us, the security guys, the intelligence that says, hey, this email just came in here. The user actually clicked on it, and that gives you a very, very early warning and a starting point for the threat hunters to start killing and containing that threat before it spreads, widely throughout the network.
Right. I've seen that. I've not paid enough attention as I should have. Do you know when Microsoft is going to be rolling that out? Do they have a date yet, or is it just?
Yeah, it's actually, we probably got, 40 or 50 MSPs that are they've already standardized on it.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I don't know the exact date, but it was rolled out this year where people were adopting it. I definitely know it would compete with something like a Proofpoint. But mail spam phishing telemetry for us is very crucial, and that's actually our newest attack vector that we actually just added for a vendor called Iron Scales. Was our first one, and then we've got 4 or 5 we're trying to integrate with.
All right, I know them. I do all of my 365 stuff through AppRiver.
Yep, company in Dallas.
I don't know if you guys play nice with them or compete against them directly, but that would be something I'd have to look at as to what I'm using for the email threat protection with them.
Yeah, they would be another candidate for us to integrate with, because when you take that data, it's like, who's monitoring that type of data? And you want to be able to pivot off that data to look across the network, the endpoint, and other cloud vectors. So we're looking for more and more data type partners. AppRiver, which is owned by Zix.
Zix, yeah. And they're out by you, by the way.
Yeah, they're literally next door to us. So
really?
Yeah, we're neighbors right here in Dallas. So
all right, want me to introduce you?
Go ahead, feel free to do that.
Oh, okay, great. So having gone through everything we've gone through, I know that we could go through stuff all the time, and I'm sure you guys hear from a lot of MSPs about good stuff, bad stuff, what we're doing, what we can't do, all of this stuff. But if there is one thing that you can say that we're not doing, that we should be doing, what is it that you see out there that just leaves you aghast sometimes?
Yeah, so I'm going to reiterate, there's always going to be a security gap. We're never going to be 100% bulletproof, right? That's my perspective and position on things. However, let's say that we're at 40% today of our security posture. What can we do to go bite off the biggest bite out of crime to help us get to 70 or 80 or even 90, whatever that percent is, that's significantly greater than what we are today? And I'm going to tell you, just from the compromised accounts that we see every hour, every day, is the whole Microsoft Office unauthorized access to email accounts, because that's where a lot of this bad stuff starting, and it's the #1 blind spot throughout the industry. And it amazes me because it's everybody in the world has a Microsoft Office 365 account, almost. And that is what we have to get into perspective.
So we're going way off track here, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but because I do see that, and I see that part of it is because customers don't think that they need to pay extra, that once they get a 365 account, all of that stuff comes with it, and all of the additional security that we want to provide, they don't want to pay for. Well, it should be built into the cost. And I know the successful MSPs have basically baked it into their price when they're reselling directly. But that's a hard thing for us to do.
Yeah, let's go back in time when all the small business were based on WISE terminals, right?
Okay.
Remember 1993?
Yeah.
Remember 94 when everybody was we just started implementing Lotus Notes as email. We were getting off of the WISE terminals and we're rolling out packed bales and compact PCs off the shelf.
Yep. And Novell GroupWise and
Yeah, WordPerfect is our number one processor. And guess what? AV. Why do I need AV? Doesn't this computer, it's a box, it's secure. You got a coax cable. How's an attacker going to get into my packed bell PC? I mean, it's the same analogy. The more and more technological applications and devices it's the same story as 20, 30 years ago. It's, oh, what about security? It's that afterthought. And you hit the nail on the head. It's some situations we're forced to sell it as an add-on, but it really doesn't need to be sold as an add-on. It has to be baked into the cost. It's like you're selling 365, you're selling Sonic Wall, you're selling XYZ AV, and the list goes on and on. Who's going to monitor all that? How can you not to afford not to have a SOC or some type of dedicated security operations that's going through all that data? That's my position on it.
All right. Well, we're definitely going to have some conversations when we talk later about all this stuff, because that is the thing. And it's funny because I thought about that earlier when you mentioned NIST, because that's another area, and it doesn't pertain specifically to you guys, but a lot of us try to say that we follow NIST, but yet when we look at all of the aspects that are truly implemented, most of the time, I've got one client that I'm fighting with. When I try to explain to them, you're only doing about 50% of what you should be doing. And they're like, well, isn't that enough?
Yeah. Well, you'll hang in there with us. You'll probably start seeing a lot of this stuff coming around the corner.
All right. Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I probably should have done this much earlier. Should have had it up all during the show. Got your RocketCyber logo up there. Billy Austin, CEO and co-founder of RocketCyber, had a good conversation here. I hope that I asked questions in a good and proper way for you.
Yeah, no, this is I'm definitely all about these bi-directional conversations, and no, really pleased that you asked us to come on the show. Thanks for having me.
All right, and we'll probably need to have you back on after I get started with you, because I have a feeling that that is going to happen. So we'll have to have a follow-up show and talk about how great things have been.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much.
All right. So if I need to tell people where to go, I know that the website, RocketCyber.com, pretty much anybody can find, but for MSPs, IT professionals that want to get started and get this 21 free days that you offered us, is there a specific email to go to or a specific landing site?
Yeah, if you go to if you do go to RocketCyber.com, up in the very far right-hand corner, there's going to be a sign up. Click on the sign up, and that is basically going to give you all the details that says, hey, here's what's included. You'll see references of all your free Office 365 user monitoring, all the different integrations. Once you sign up, you're going to be enabled to get a 21-day free SOC for all your customers. And that's how you get going.
All right. So I'm going to put the links to RocketCyber website and that sign up in the show notes. So those of you that go to the webpage and listen, you can just hit that right from there. And Billy, I want to say thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Hope you have a great weekend, Marvin.
I'm going to try. As long as the sun stays out, I'm good this weekend. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for downloading and subscribing and listening to another episode of PodNuts Pro. Remember, we are here trying to help you make your business better, stronger, and faster. If you have questions, comments, suggestions for show topics or anything, send those over to me, marvin@podnuts.com. And as many of you have heard before, you can always find us on YouTube and the Facebook. Sign up on those pages, like us, or whatever you got to do to get alerts when we do these live shows and when new podcasts are released. And that's going to do it for this episode. And on behalf of my guest, Billy Austin, I want to say thank you. And until next time, holla.